The Metabox P970EN is a powerful gaming laptop while being in a thinner Clevo chassis, so let's find out what's on offer in this detailed review. I'll be looking at gaming performance, thermals, overclocking, battery life, and basically everything in between to help you decide if it's worth buying. Starting with the specs, my unit has an Intel i7-8750H CPU, 80W Nvidia RTX 2080 Max-Q graphics, 32GB of memory running in dual channel, a 17.3-inch 1080p 144Hz screen, and a 500GB NVMe M.2 SSD. It's got Gigabit Ethernet, 802.11ac Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth 5. However, hardware can be customized while ordering. You can check the options using the link in the description. The laptop has a metallic body and the lid is a matte gunmetal color, while the interior is matte black, and there are no sharp corners or edges anywhere. Overall, it felt quite well built compared to other Clevo units I've tested. The weight of the laptop is listed at 2.5 kilos bare bones, so expect differences based on hardware selection. Mine was just below this, and with the 180W power brick and cables for charging included, the total weight rises to above 3.1 kilos. The dimensions of the laptop are 39.8 centimeters in width, 26.8 centimeters in depth, and just under 2 centimeters in height, so not too large for a 17-inch laptop. The smaller overall footprint gives us thin bezels around the screen, which are about 8mm or so based on my own measurements. The 17.3-inch 144Hz 1080p IPS level screen looks pretty good. All viewing angles were fine, however there was no G-Sync available here. I've measured the current color gamut of the screen using the Spider 5 Pro, and my results returned 98% of sRGB, 68% of NTSC, and 74% of Adobe RGB. At 100% brightness, I measured the panel at 326 nits in the center, and with an 820:1 contrast ratio. So overall, pretty good for a laptop. Plenty for gaming, but I think also acceptable for photo or video editing. I've taken a long exposure photo in a dark room as a worst case backlight bleed test, and there were a few imperfections detected towards the bottom. However, I couldn't actually notice these while viewing darker content, but results will vary between laptop and panel. There was less screen flex than expected, considering that the lid is on the thinner side. However, it does mostly seem to be metal, and having the hinges out towards the corners further aids stability. The laptop can just be opened up with one finger. The weight distribution is somewhat even due to the cooling towards the back and battery up the front, and I had no problems using it on my lap. Despite the thin screen bezels, the camera is found above the display in the center. The 720p camera was blurry but not too bad, and the microphone sounded pretty good. The keyboard in my unit had 3 zones of RGB backlighting, which could be controlled through the included Control Center software, and even the secondary functions of the keys get lit up. Overall, I liked typing on the keyboard. Here's how it sounds to try and give you an idea of what to expect. There was a little keyboard flex while pushing down hard, which I think should be expected given the keyboard gets removed in order to access the internals. No issues during normal use in any case. The glass touchpad has precision drivers and was excellent. Same as the P960ED, definitely one of the smoothest feeling touchpads I've ever used. The touchpad itself does not press down. However, it has physically separate left and right click buttons. It's actually got an in-glass fingerprint sensor, so after setting up Windows Hello, the touchpad will glow where you need to place your finger in order to log in, and it seemed to work fast enough. Fingerprints and dirt show up on the matte black interior, but as a smooth surface, they're easy to clean. On the left, there's the only side exhaust vent, so no hot air blowing on your hand if you're right-handed, along with most of the I/O, including the power input, HDMI 2.0 output, mini DisplayPort 1.3 output, 2 USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-C ports, the first of which also has DisplayPort 1.3 available, however no Thunderbolt here, followed by a USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type-A port. On the right, there are 3.5mm headphone and microphone jacks, second USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type-A port, SD card slot, Gigabit Ethernet port, and Kensington lock. On the back, there's just air exhaust vents towards the left and right corners, while the front just has some status LEDs towards the right-hand side. Underneath, there's heaps of ventilation holes to assist airflow, and we'll see how a cooling pad can help take advantage of these soon. The 2 speakers are found on the left and right corners and face down. They don't sound that great and were tinny at higher volumes. Here's what we're looking at in terms of max volume while playing music, and latency mon seemed to think it was alright. The bottom panel can be removed by taking out 12 screws with a Phillips head screwdriver. Once removed, the keyboard needs to be popped off. Just be careful as it's attached by ribbon cables. Underneath the keyboard are a further 4 screws to remove before taking off the bottom panel. Once inside, from left to right, we get access to the battery, 2 M.2 slots, 2 memory slots, Wi-Fi card, and 2.5-inch drive bay. Powering the laptop is a 4-cell 62Wh battery, and with a full charge and just watching YouTube videos with the screen on half brightness, keyboard lighting off, and background apps disabled, I was able to use it for 3 hours and 43 minutes. The Intel integrated graphics were in use during this test thanks to Nvidia Optimus. While playing The Witcher 3 with medium settings and Nvidia's battery boost set to 30 FPS, the battery lasted for 1 hour and 11 minutes, and the frame rate didn't drop at any point. The result while gaming was about average, perhaps a little lower outside of gaming though. I didn't see the battery lose charge at any point with the 180-watt power brick plugged in, but more on whether it's enough soon. Thermal testing was completed with an ambient room temperature of 24 degrees Celsius, so expect different temperatures in different environments. Also keep in mind there are heat pipes shared between processor and graphics, so a change in one of these will affect the other. Starting at the bottom of the graph, at idle the temperatures were pretty good. The gaming tests were done with Watch Dogs 2, as I find it to use a good combination of CPU and GPU, while the stress tests were done by running the Ada64 stress test and Heaven benchmark at the same time in order to attempt to fully utilize both the processor and graphics. There were no problems while gaming in my tests, and we can see that the cooling pad improved temperatures by around 8 degrees on the graphics and 11 on the CPU. A very nice result due to the big air vents on the bottom. While under combined stress test, the CPU was intermittently thermal throttling and constant power limit throttling at 95 degrees. However, the cooling pad removed the thermal throttling and dropped CPU temperatures by 10, shown by the results at the top of the graph. I've also only performed testing with the fans at default speeds, as I found them to be running at maximum anyway out of the box under these loads, so no need to test both default and max speeds separately. These are the average clock speeds for the same tests just shown. We're not seeing any improvement in CPU performance with the cooling pad in use, despite there being some thermal throttling on the CPU in the stress tests. This was because the CPU was both thermal and power limit throttling, and it seems like it was only just on the edge of thermal throttling. The power limit was the main factor holding back performance, shown by the speeds remaining unchanged. Well, actually slightly lowering with the cooling pad while gaming or under stress test. While the cooling pad doesn't necessarily help improve performance here, as we just saw, it certainly did improve the temperatures by quite a lot. The minus 0.12 volt undervolt to the CPU, shown by UV on the graph, makes the most improvements to CPU performance, as it helps with the power limit throttling. Here's what we're looking at in terms of average CPU TDP. The limit was 45 watts in Intel XTU, but I was not able to change this. The CPU undervolt lowers it a bit, though I'm not too sure why using the cooling pad lowers it further. I guess it can run better when not as hot, but even that doesn't make sense, because as we just saw before, the clock speeds were down a little, which is probably the reason. I'm just not sure why it happened. Anyway, at stock, not only was there intermittent thermal throttling as mentioned before and power limit throttling, there was also intermittent current limit throttling. I'm honestly not sure if the 180 watt power brick is enough for these specs. Most other laptops seem to have 230 watt bricks. Granted, those are usually with the 90 watt variant of the 2080 Max-Q, and this is the first 80 watt one I've tested. There was no battery drain at any time as mentioned, but it seems like this is due to the limitations in place that prevent higher levels of performance. I suppose given the intermittent thermal throttling out of the box in the worst case stress test, there's no point giving it more juice. However, with the cooling pad, as we saw, temperatures could be improved by quite a lot, so would in theory be possible to put the power to use there once there's more thermal headroom. Regardless, as we'll see soon in the gaming benchmarks, it still performs quite well. These are the clock speeds I got while just running CPU-only stress tests without any GPU load, and without that combined load, the results are better. There was power limit throttling both at stock and with the CPU undervolt in place. We were only just very slightly below the full 3.9 GHz all-core turbo speed of the i7-8750H once undervolted. However, if you could push the undervolt a little further, it should be fine, but that varies between chips. I wasn't able to raise the power limit in CPU-only load here either, so that couldn't be used to improve the performance. The undervolting also improved the temperatures by a couple of degrees while also improving performance at the same time. To demonstrate how this translates into practical performance, I've got some Cinebench CPU benchmarks here. Full performance was achieved with single core in either test, as power limit throttling only takes place under multi-core workloads, and once undervolted, there was a nice improvement to the multi-core score. Here are the GPU-only clock speeds while under a graphical-only stress test, and the results with a manual 100 MHz overclocked applied through MSI Afterburner. There's no real difference, and this shows in the temperatures, as we're hitting power limit throttling even at stock. As for the external temperatures where you'll actually be putting your hands, at idle it was in the low 30s, fairly average. While gaming and under stress test, it got fairly warm in the center and towards the lower left of the keyboard, reaching the mid-50s between the keys. As for the fan noise produced by the laptop, I'll let you have a listen to some of these tests. At idle, it was close to silent, just slightly audible. While gaming or under stress test with the fans at default speeds, we can see that they were just as loud manually maxed out, as they were already running at full speed under these loads. Finally, let's take a look at some gaming benchmarks. I've tested these games with these Nvidia drivers, and Windows fully updated, with performance mode in the control center software enabled. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results here look alright, coming in just below the Alienware M17 and Asus GX701 with 90W version of the 2080 Max-Q. I'll show some differences after we get through the rest of the results. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results here are above most other laptops I've tested, and above those of the newer Far Cry New Dawn just shown. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode rather than multiplayer, as it's easier to consistently reproduce the same test run. High settings gave us 100 FPS with RTX off, shown by the purple bars, while it was actually playable at ultra settings with RTX on, shown by the green bars. Though for a first-person shooter, you'll likely want higher FPS, and given lower settings with RTX on doesn't look as good in my opinion as higher settings with RTX off, to me it makes sense to keep RTX off for performance and visual quality. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark, and as a more CPU-heavy test, the results from the Asus Scar 2 with 2060 graphics are actually ahead at all setting levels except for ultra-high, where presumably the 2080 Max-Q starts coming out ahead as we get more GPU bound. The Witcher 3 was tested with Hairworks disabled, and once again, the performance was pretty good here. The results weren't quite as good as the Asus GX701, however it was beating the Alienware M17 with the same specs. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, with fairly decent results from this test. Even at highest settings, 86 FPS was possible here. CSGO was tested with the Uletical FPS benchmark, and the results were alright. However, for reference, with the same specs in the Asus GX701, I was getting 250 FPS with all settings maxed out, which is more than the results here at lowest settings. Dota 2 was tested in the middle lane with an average amount of action going on, and the results were fairly good, able to fully utilize the 144Hz refresh rate screen even with higher settings. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and as I'm using the default built-in presets, they automatically set 50% render scale and TAA, so the frame rates are very high here. Fortnite was tested using the replay feature, and as a well-optimized game, the frame rates from this test were very high. No problems at all running it with maximum epic settings. Overwatch is another game that is well optimized and runs on pretty much anything. At low settings, the 300 frame cap is being hit at times, while even epic settings ran very smoothly without any problems. Watch Dogs 2 is a resource-intensive game. However, as I think it plays well with a solid 30 FPS, even the near 60 FPS averages at ultra settings worked fine with no problems. Speaking of resource heavy, or is it? I feel like PUBG isn't as bad as it was many months ago now. Anyway, with the replay feature, we're almost touching 100 FPS at ultra settings, which seems pretty good to me. Metro Exodus was tested with the built-in benchmark, which is known to perform worse than actual gameplay. So this is more of a synthetic test for comparing with my previous results, rather than representative of what to expect in-game. Overall, the gaming performance was good, easily able to run the games tested at 1080p with max settings thanks to the i7-8750H CPU, Nvidia RTX 2080 Max-Q graphics, and dual-channel memory. To get some context though, let's see how it compares with some other gaming laptops. Use this information as a rough guide only, as tests were done at different times with different drivers. Here are the results from Far Cry 5, with the P970EN shown up the top of the graph in red. Out of the random selection of laptops shown, it's performing third best, slotting in right where expected, below the other two 90W 2080 Max-Q laptops tested, the more expensive GX701 and M17. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the built-in benchmark at highest settings, the P970EN is giving good performance. Despite being the 80W variant of the 2080 Max-Q graphics, in this test it's still beating the Alienware M17, as the M17 has thermal throttling on the GPU, which I'll cover in another video. In Battlefield 5, we're looking at the P970EN beating the M17 again, granted only slightly, while both are a fair bit behind the GX701. It would be good if I had RTX 2070 data to compare with. I'm interested to see how the 2080 Max-Q stacks up. But alas, that is not currently possible. Something that I noticed while doing the game tests was that in general, the 1% low results were lower than other laptops with lower graphics. And same with average FPS at lower settings. I'm thinking that this is due to the CPU power limit throttling, discussed previously in the thermal testing section. This should become less of an issue at higher settings once we become more GPU bound, or at higher resolutions if you're connecting, say, an external 1440p screen for instance. Now for the benchmarking tools. I've tested Heaven, Valley, and Superposition from Unigine, as well as Firestrike, TimeSpy, Port Royal, and VRMark from 3DMark. Just pause the video if you want a detailed look at these results. As we saw earlier, we've got the option of overclocking the graphics and undervolting the CPU to increase performance. So let's see how this actually helps in gaming. Far Cry 5 was retested using the built-in benchmark at 1080p, with the manual tweaks shown by the red bars. In general, 1% low performance was actually lower, so perhaps what I just said doesn't apply to all games. In general, average frame rates were slightly up, but honestly, these results are quite close together. I had a hard time getting my overclock stable too, which is why I ended up using low values. Granted, the graphics were power limit throttling at stock anyway, which is why I think we're not seeing much difference here. I've used Crystal Diskmark to test the storage, and my 500GB Samsung Evo 970 Plus was getting very nice read and write speeds. However, this will of course vary based on the storage you select. The SD card slot was tested with a V90 card, and the results were very nice, some of the best I've seen from a laptop. For updated pricing, check the links in the description, as prices will change over time. At the time of recording, here in Australia the base model goes for about 3,600 Australian dollars, though a couple hundred more to get dual channel memory. And just for comparison, other laptops with similar specs here are going for closer to 5,000 Australian dollars, such as the Alienware M17 and Asus GX701. So for 2080 Max-Q graphics, the P970EN seems like a decent pick here. Granted, it is the lower 80W version, while the others have the more powerful 90W version. For my international viewers, with our tax removed, that's about $2,300 US. But remember, stuff still costs more here too. So what did you guys think about the Metabox P970EN gaming laptop? Like the P960ED I recently covered, I think it's a pretty good Clevo laptop, and definitely a step up compared to what was available previously. The thin bezel design is appreciated. The glass touchpad with fingerprint scanner was nice. And it's got powerful specs considering it's just 2cm thick with decent build quality. Due to that size, we do see hot temperatures at stock with the CPU. However, as we've seen, tweaks could be made such as undervolting to improve performance. The large air vents underneath also allowed a cooling pad to significantly help improve thermals. Granted, that's not really a portable solution, it's better than many other laptops I've tested recently that only had minimal intake vents. The performance overall was pretty good. In some cases, the 80W 2080 Max-Q was outperforming the thermal throttling 90W variant in the Alienware M17. However, I do wonder if more performance could be possible if paired with a more powerful power brick. Here in Australia for these specs, the price is honestly quite impressive. Yeah, the competition has better build quality and overall the finish seems more premium. But that's nothing new when it comes to these Clevo units. I think Metabox are providing a good value machine here. Let me know what you guys thought about the Metabox P970EN laptop down in the comments. And if you're new to the channel, get subscribed for future tech videos like this one.